Hey everyone, this is Nick and welcome to your first Linux open source and privacy news video of the year, where by happenstance most of the bigger topics are super inflammatory. Yay! This week we have Arch being touted as the most popular distro, although the methodology to reach that conclusion is heavily flawed. We have x.org or x11 completely dying off as contributors simply desert the project. And we also have Meta getting an enormous fine from the EU as a confirmation of a previous decision for them breaching privacy laws. And we also have more information about System76's cosmic desktop environment. We have fully AMD GPU and CPUs powered devices running Linux out of the box. And we have this segue to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare, and if you run CentOS machines, you might be starting to panic about the fast approaching end of life of CentOS 7. Well, you don't have to worry anymore, because thanks to TuxCare you can still get 4 years of free software updates and security patches for CentOS when you purchase a Kernel Care Enterprise subscription. So not only do you get live patching for these servers to stay secure and up to date without any downtime or reboots or maintenance windows to plan around, but you can also keep your current operating system so you have more time to plan your upgrade path. Check out Kernel Care Enterprise and get your free extended support for CentOS 7 by clicking the link in the description below. So, is Arch the most popular Linux distribution? Because according to Reddit users, it is. The Linuxiac website used the number of members in the various distribution-related subreddits as an indicator of popularity. And Arch Linux is number 1 with 226,000 members, followed by Ubuntu with 209,000 members. Then Tails with 91,000, then Fedora, Mint, Kali Linux, Manjaro, Debian, Pop! OS and Red Hat. And OpenSUSE and Elementary OS follow, and then poor Solus, Kubuntu, MX Linux or Slackware trail far, far behind. Of course, the methodology here is completely flawed, as Reddit is not a good indicator of popularity, since it is not something that is widely used by every category of user. And people being members of a subreddit doesn't mean they actually like the distribution. They might just be here for trolling purposes. So basically there's a very visible selection bias, which is also why Arch has the most members. Reddit isn't used by regular average people that might be more at ease on a more simple distro than Arch. And since Arch is more complex, it also probably has more members in its subreddit, because there are way more issues to solve, while users of more simple distros use them quietly without ever joining the subreddit at all. And the fact that Arch users can't help but communicate to everyone around them that they do in fact use Arch, by the way, is probably another very big bias in terms of community sizes. Now, more seriously, X11 development has all but completely stopped. In 2022, only 156 commits have been made to the X server master branch on Git, half of what was done last year. That amounts to 3,600 lines of code added and 888 lines removed. Now, as a comparison, in 2021, there were 31,000 new lines of code and 180,000 lines removed. So basically in 2022, it's as low as it was in 2003, when they switched from their old development model in the middle of a year. These changes were made by 32 people only, down from 48 last year, and that's also the lowest number of contributors the X server has seen since 2003. Of course, it is not hard to imagine why. Most companies that contributed to X11 now contribute to Wayland implementations instead, because that's now the default on the biggest distros out there like Ubuntu or Fedora. And the code bases for these implementations, they're leaner, they're easier to handle, and they will let them implement more modern multi-monitor handling, better hardware acceleration, better compositing, or HDR support. X.org is basically in maintenance mode with no new features being added, and if they were, they probably wouldn't get any support from most desktop environments who are mostly focused on Wayland right now. So yeah, goodbye x.org, you served us very faithfully and loyally, and you will still continue to work for decades to come, but you will not be maintained in a few years, that's for sure. It's such a big code base, 2, 3, 5 or even 10 people can probably not maintain it properly for real-world use in real-world distribution. So either a distro that does not want to use Wayland starts picking up the slack, or everybody moves to Wayland and we forget that x.org ever existed. Now, remember that nice little fine Meta was going to get from the EU? Well, the Irish Data Protection Commission confirmed the decision this week, but they didn't really want it to. Facebook will be fined 210 million euros and Instagram 180 million euros for breaching the GDPR. So basically, as a recap, Meta forced users to agree to data collection and data usage for ads in their terms of service without giving them a choice to opt out, which is against the European law. The EU Data Protection Board confirmed that access to personal data for targeted ads is not a necessary part of the core service that Facebook or Instagram provide, what's detailed in the contract. This decision means that basically any company that wants access to personal data needs to ask permission of their customers. They can't just say, if you use our product, then you accept the data collection and use for ads. And that's huge news. Now, Meta has been ordered to bring their products into compliance with the GDPR within 3 months, and they will have to ask their users for consent, which will definitely hurt their business, at least in the EU, as they can still use that behavior in other countries with more lax privacy laws. Of course, Meta announced that they will appeal the decision. They're taking the stance that it would be weird for a social media service to not be tailored to the user. They also don't think they will have to ask consent from every user, saying that other businesses don't, and they're looking for ways to avoid doing that. Now, what's more interesting here is that the Irish Data Protection Commission doesn't seem to agree with the EU on the matter, as they do think the terms and conditions are not clear enough for users to understand that they signed up for an ad contract, but they're also saying that Meta should be allowed to just enforce consent through these terms and conditions as long as it's clearly stated that they also include agreement for data usage for ads. But since GDPR enforcement is done in cooperation with multiple data protection agencies from multiple European countries, they had to agree to a collective decision. So basically, this is a big mess, and Facebook will probably drag this one out in courts for years. But I don't think they'll have an easy time arguing that targeted ads are a core part of the experience for the user. They're a core part of the service for them, for the company, but not for users using the service. And you could provide a tailored social media experience without having tailored ads. So I don't see how they could win this one, but I'm not a lawyer, so we'll have to see. Now, since everyone always asks where is the full AMD Linux hardware, well, there's one computer doing that now. Slimbook released a brand new desktop, the Chimera Ventus AMD, in its black limited edition. Now, it has a nice black metal case with a stylized tux drawn in white wireframe, and it runs, as its name implies, only AMD hardware. It uses a Ryzen 7000 series CPU, and it offers a choice between a Radeon 6750 XT, a 7900 XT, or a 7900 XTX, which are the very latest AMD cards. It supports DDR5 RAM up to 64 gigs and up to 4 terabytes of storage. And of course, since it's a limited edition, the inventory is finite and it starts at 2,000 euros, taxes included, for a 16 gig model with 1 terabyte of spinning Rust, not SSD, and the Ryzen 7 7700X CPU and the Radeon 6750 XT card. Of course, you can also trick it out with all the tacky RGB you want to ruin that elegant black look, and you can also opt for the non-black edition, which offers a choice between Intel or AMD CPUs and Nvidia GPUs as well. Or they also have a mini ATX variant that could make for a nice Steam console with SteamOS. So now people can finally stop asking me on every hardware review where the full AMD devices are. okay, that's just only one, and we still need a laptop using an AMD GPU instead of an NVIDIA GPU, so the question is still valid. It looks like Google is interested in the RISC V architecture, the open source CPU project that lets manufacturers create either super small and efficient CPUs or monstrous high core counts beasts with the same set of instructions. At the RISC V Summit conference, Google said they wanted the architecture to be seen as a tier 1 platform on Android, on par with ARM. They say there's a lot of work to do to optimize Android for RISC V, and they outlined a multi-year roadmap. But still, the Android open source project already started to receive patches for RISC V in September. The build can even already be downloaded by anyone right now, and they promised initial Android emulator support for 2023 and support for Java applications in the first quarter. Now, why would Google invest so much time into a yet unproven CPU architecture? It's probably because ARM is starting to be more of a risk than it was before. The company that handles this CPU architecture was almost sold to NVIDIA before that company backed out, and they now want to have an IPO for the company to publicly trade it, which put together are clear signs that investors want to pull out with a nice big amount of money. ARM also sued one of their biggest consumers, Qualcomm, because they bought a chip design firm called Nuvia, and ARM would like Qualcomm to destroy Nuvia's chip designs because basically they're fusing their license to use ARM, where before there were 2 licenses, so it's kind of a breach of contract in ARM's eyes. It's weird. So basically ARM feels like a company that doesn't know what it's doing or where it's going. And since Android basically relies on ARM to even have any hardware to ship on, supporting an open source architecture they could use themselves to design their own chips and that couldn't be controlled by a potential competitor is probably a safer bet. I personally have no problems with this. I would rather have a tech giant like Google contributing and supporting an open source CPU architecture than fighting it tooth and nail or creating their own as a competitor. And since the project has existed for a while now and already has governance in place, I don't think Google can just hijack it and decide to do whatever they want with it, so I think it's good. Now, System76 shared more details about their upcoming Cosmic desktop environment developed in Rust. First, they will be integrating the Slint toolkit as well as the Iced one. While Iced is made for software written in Rust, Slint would open the desktop up to other programming languages as well, like JavaScript applets and applications. They're also looking at Access Kit, which is a project written in Rust as well, that aims to combine accessibility-related code from multiple toolkits into a single cross-platform framework. So stuff like screen readers, font size scaling, and the like would be easier to integrate with Cosmic. They're also reworking the notification indicators that they call applets. These are now all integrated into Iced, and they have applets for audio, battery, graphics, network, notifications, power, time, and workspaces. They're also expanding the feature set people might be used to in these applets, like adding the option to limit the battery's charge to 80% to save up on battery cycles. And sure, every time they share something, it kinda looks like they're just re-implementing all the basics, and that's probably what they're doing because that's where you start when you make a new project. But still, it shows that the desktop has a clear vision, a clear direction, and that's very reassuring for the final product. And let's wrap up with the gaming news. Now, it looks like the growth of Linux gamers has stalled a little bit, with the Linux market share on Steam dipping to 1.38% in December compared to around 1.5% in November. Nothing concerning, we'll have to see how the trend evolves. SteamOS is still the #1 distro used, with 24% of Linux Steam users using it. More exciting, we have Valve teasing HDR support for Linux games, at least on SteamOS and the Steam Deck. It's very early work, but developers have reported it working on Death Stranding and Deep Rock Galactic, for example. Nothing is available for the general public, of course, and that work will probably have to be replicated and reworked to be usable in other systems that don't use GameScope, which is SteamOS's compositor. And we also have AMD ray tracing getting closer to being usable. Mesa is going to enable support for it in Quake 2 RTX and Doom Eternal. Now why these two games? Because the work isn't done and it needs more debugging. But they also want to start enabling for specific games to get more feedback and allow for wider testing. This should land in Mesa 23 later this year. Pretty exciting stuff. With HDR support and full-on ray tracing, there won't be much that Linux is missing compared to Windows. Well, except for Destiny 2, because Bungie are a bunch of idiots. Just like I would be an idiot if I didn't tell you about today's sponsor. If you're looking to buy a new device to run Linux on, don't just buy any old Windows computer and slap your distro on it and pray that everything works well. Buy something from Tuxedo. The link is in the description. They're a company that makes laptops and desktops. They ship them worldwide and they ship them with Linux out of the box. The hardware is picked specifically to work with Linux. They have a big range of devices that should satisfy every need and every price point, and all of them are customizable, upgradable, and repairable. And you can even do stuff like engrave your own custom keyboard layout on your laptop or your own custom logo on the lid of the laptop. So if you need a new device, don't hesitate. Click the link in the description below and get yourself something from Tuxedo. They're really good. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment. And if you didn't, well, there's also that dislike button. You can click it and tell me why in the comments as well. And if you want to help support the channel, there's a super thanks button underneath this YouTube video. There's a PayPal link in the description, and I left links to my Patreon memberships and YouTube memberships. Both will give you access to a weekly podcast where I talk about Linux, tech, open source, and general channel-related things. And you also get to vote on the next topics that I'll cover on the channel for the month that comes after. So if you're interested, both links are down there. And if you're not, well, it's okay. I guess thanks for watching, and you'll see me in the next one. Bye!